All right. So the former leader of the Proud Boys, Enrique Tarrio, has officially been handed down his sentence for his actions on January 6th during the Capitol insurrection. So I got an article here from Axios just giving us some of the basic details. They start off here saying Henry Enrique Tarrio, the former leader of the right-wing extremist group, the Proud Boys, was sentenced on Wednesday to 22 years in prison, 22 years for his role on January 6th. They say Tarrio's sentencing caps off one of the highest profile prosecutions related to the Capitol riot and is the single longest sentence handed down in the Jan 6 cases. The previous highest sentencing record related to Jan 6 was actually held by, a similar leader with a similar organization, the Oath Keepers founder, Stuart Rhodes, who was sentenced to 18 years in prison in May. Now, this wasn't as high as it looked like the prosecutors were going for. Obviously, the charge is seditious conspiracy, which I think fits given what they were trying to do on that day, but prosecutors were trying to get a 33-year sentence for him. They only got 22 years, but I think that's still pretty substantial, especially considering, as we're going to get to here in a second, that Enrique Tarrio actually wasn't personally there on January 6th at the Capitol, but basically it looks like they made the case that he was still significantly involved in sort of the, background organization and logistical, pushes to try to actually overturn or to halt the process that was happening on January 6th of the counting of the electoral votes and all of that stuff. So 22 years, pretty substantial, obviously 18 years for the Oath Keepers founder or the Oath Keepers head as well. But they continue here. They say Tarrio wasn't at the January 6th Capitol riot. Why wasn't he there? Well, it was because he was busy getting arrested days earlier for vandalizing a Black Lives Matter banner at a historic black church in Washington, D.C. in 2020. So just an upstanding member of society that we're talking about here, right? Oh, I'm sorry, guys. I couldn't be there with you on the day that we tried to, overturn the U.S. government, kind of, sort of. I was busy, basically doing a little bit of light, domestic terrorism and, trying to go tear down a Black Lives Matter banner at a historic black church. I mean, just a completely insane person that we're talking about here, right? They say, however, prosecutors have argued that Tarrio maintained command over the Proud Boys members after his arrest and cheered on the group as its members stormed the Capitol. They say prosecutors also noted that Tarrio took credit for the riot on behalf of the group. Yeah, that'll do it. That'll do it. Not really going to help your defense there when you're taking credit after the fact for the riot and sort of what your organization, your group members were doing at the time. Don't think that's going to help with the defense there, and obviously it didn't at the end of the day. But we have a direct quote here from Matthew Graves, who's the U.S. attorney for Washington, D.C., and he said, "No organization put more boots on the ground at the Capitol on January 6th than the Proud Boys, and they were at the forefront of every major breach of the Capitol's defenses, leading the on-the-ground efforts to storm the seat of government." And the Proud Boys, or the leaders of the Proud Boys and the leaders of the Oath Keepers who conspired before, during, and after the siege of the Capitol to use force against their own government to prevent the peaceful transfer of power, have now been held accountable. And honestly, I'm not going to pretend to know what was going through some of these guys' minds at the time. I mean, I think personally that Enrique Tarrio seems to be a guy who really reveled in a lot of the attention that he was getting and sort of stirring up controversy and all of that. I think he liked being the face of the Proud Boys. I don't know if these guys genuinely believed that the insurrection was going to be successful, and maybe they thought if we actually do keep Trump in power and this is our moment and we're actually going to do this, then we won't be held accountable after the fact because our guy will still, be able to get us off the hook. I don't know if that's actually what they believed, but believe it or not, when your insurrection, your pathetic insurrection, is not successful, then the feds are going to jump down your ass, and that's exactly what happened to him. So they finish off here. They say, the Justice Department said in the spring that more than 1,030 people have been charged in connection to January 6th in the roughly 2 years since the attack, and about 570 of them have pleaded guilty to their charges. Two other former Proud Boy leaders also received lengthy sentences last week, and that would be Joseph Biggs, who was sentenced to 17 years in prison, and Zachary Rell, who received 15 years in prison. So a lot of pretty substantial sentences coming down for some of the, upper echelons within these major organizations organizations that helped to lead the push of, exactly what happened on that day. And so that kind of leads me to this, which is, where is this going to go from here? I mean, maybe you could say that, Enrique Tarrio, I guess if he has like good behavior is what they call it, while he's in, rotting in prison, then maybe he'll get a lighter sentence, or, down the line, or maybe, we'll just end up with Donald Trump winning the White House in 2024, which at this point is basically a coin flip, and maybe he'll follow through on his promise to give full pardons to January 6 rioters. Now, in this instance, does Donald Trump just, is he just referring to some of the, more lower level offenders, maybe people who vandalized something, or people who were just sort of going with the flow of the crowd and just sort of like waltzed around the Capitol or something like that? I mean, remember that picture of like that old woman who was like smiling and holding up a tiny little U.S. flag? Is he talking about people like that, or is he talking about all of the above, everybody from that old lady who, probably wasn't even capable of wielding violence or doing anything serious on that day? Or, is he talking about everybody up to the leaders of the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys? I mean, obviously, it's yet to be seen. I would not put it past him to actually do something like that. So, just another reminder, another indication as to why maybe having Donald Trump in the White House again is not a great thing. So, I'll finish off just with a personal anecdote, because I actually did have a personal experience with Enrique Tarrio one time, coming face to face with him sort of at a protest that I happened to be at. I wasn't necessarily there as a protester. I was more just like documenting things and seeing what it was like, because it was taking place at the Georgia State Capitol that was like right next to where I lived at the time back in Atlanta. And basically, I mean, it was kind of interesting. The only reason I bring it up is because I thought it was interesting how the police interacted with the different groups on that day. You had, again, like MAGA people, right-wing people who were right after the election. This was on like, I think November 20th or 21st or something. And you had a lot of MAGA protesters who were out there who were pissed off about the election. You had Enrique Tarrio, some other members of the Proud Boys there, pretending to be like the first line of defense or something against the radical left communists or whatever the fuck. And then you also had a lot of left-wing counter-protesters who were there as well at the time, some of which were armed, some of, which had guns. I think a lot of the right-wing people also were carrying guns as well at the time. And so because of that, you had police who were sort of, separating the two groups. You had sort of like a line of defense, sort of, keeping people within their own different sections of the protest, which was totally fine, right? And I just thought it was interesting because at some point while I was there, the police just decided to allow the leader of the Proud Boys, Enrique Tarrio, to just sort of like walk through the blockade and go directly over to where the left-wing counter-protesters were with his camera crew and a couple other of his goons, and sort of just trying to, stir shit up and trying to instigate something maybe. And I just thought that was interesting, take with that what you will, that sort of the police allowed him to do that, and, who he is as a person. But, obviously I'm not going to shed any tears for him getting the sentence that he did. I think that he obviously deserves it. And, the last thing I'll say is that you obviously want to have accountability for people who are, actually the elites, the top dogs, who sort of were more responsible for pushing the narrative that led to January 6th, right? Guys like, Rudy Giuliani, Donald Trump himself, Sidney Powell, the rest of these ghouls. I mean, obviously we have some cases against them, especially with the one down in Georgia with the RICO case against them. That'll probably be the most interesting one to see how that plays out, especially now that we have some sort of behind the scenes reports that some of Trump's lackeys are considering flipping against him to sort of save their own asses as much as they possibly can. So I'll keep you guys updated on, whatever we get out of those cases. But yeah, I mean, it would be nice to see some actual, elites, some powerful people within society be also held accountable for their actions.